Jerusalem and the Battle for Survival by Dr. Nadmi Al-Jaba from Birzeit University, which comes in the context of the traditional we started in 2021 when Azmi Bshara, director of the Arab Center, the first lecture in May 2021 on the Nakba of Palestine. Usually we hold this event in May of each year. Exceptionally, this year we are holding it in the month of June. It's our pleasure to invite Dr. Jabi to lecture on the situation in Jerusalem and the policies by Israel and the facts it has produced and on the impact of that on Palestine and the region. Dr. Al Jaba will be also focusing on the future of Jerusalem. Please allow me to briefly introduce Dr. Al Jaba. He is professor of history at Birzeit University and director of the Palestinian Studies Institute, who was formerly director of Rawak Center and contributed to the cultural life in Palestine. He has many publications on Jerusalem and Hebron and is considered an expert. He will soon publish a new book on the churches in Jerusalem. It's our pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Al Jaba, and undoubtedly you will shed light on many of issues which preoccupy us and the situation in Jerusalem. You have 45 minutes, please. The floor is yours. As a professor, the most pleasurable thing to me is one of my students introducing me, Dr. Ayat, and my deepest gratitude to Dr. Azmi and Dr. Khalid Farraj for their kind invitation. I don't know when you want to lecture on Jerusalem, we should do so or not, for Jerusalem is present in our daily life. It imposes itself, or it has been at least for the last 2 decades, and in an increasing manner. I don't know if I can explain or interpret the events that take place in Jerusalem. I'll try this evening to go through some of these aspects, maybe through the lecture and the subsequent discussion, we can manage to understand in some sort of way what's been happening in Jerusalem and the agitation and the dynamics which will be impacting not only the future of the city itself but the entire region. This city, with its importance religiously and historically and political symbolism, will be accompanying us and will be imposing itself on our agendas. I want to deal with technology as best as I can. Some say the the case, or the issue of Jerusalem is over after Trump's recognition of it as a permanent capital of Israel, and the American embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and how some Arab regimes, without naming any, have been sending signals that Jerusalem is not that important. It doesn't warrant exploding the whole region because of it. So, therefore, we should deal with reality as it is, and nobody can change this reality. This kind of vision has been some sort of a policy for many, and the Arab and non Arab support has been waning, and Jerusalem is almost forgotten. So, if one wants to take a second dose of things and look at the images which are repeated almost every other day in Jerusalem, and you hear the cries of people, which reminds us all that Jerusalem is still there, is still present, and this cry does not emanate from Jerusalem and its walls, but spreads to the rest of the region. This is one demonstration in support of Jerusalem in Beirut, and we had others in Amman and elsewhere. So, therefore, the case for Jerusalem and the cause of Jerusalem is a winner, not a loser, and people's sympathy with it continues. Before getting into any conclusions, I'll try and give some idea of the recent past. Although I prefer ancient history, but I do Jerusalem, the present and future is more important. Jerusalem, as you know, was divided in 1948 to two parts. Both parts were not equal. Eastern Jerusalem, which became under the administration of Jordan, only made up 12% of the Jerusalem in the British Mandate era, and 88% was occupied by Israel in 1948. What is symbolic is in the East Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem is situated with all the symbolism it has. In 1967, when Israel completed its occupation, and after a time the area was eastern Jerusalem was 6.5 kilometers. Now it's more than 60 kilometers. Now it borders Beit Lahem and Ramallah. So the area of the United Jerusalem, the eastern and western, is 105 square kilometers, including 72 is in eastern Jerusalem. So two-thirds of Jerusalem as the permanent capital of Israel happens to be in eastern Jerusalem. This so-called municipal borders, what were when they applied the Israeli law and therefore annexed to Israel, of course the land was annexed, but not the people who lived in the. So the people who used to live in 67 in East Jerusalem was about 70,000 living on 72 square miles. These people have been dealt with as if they came to Jerusalem as visitors or tourists and decided to stay there, and because of Israeli tolerance, they are allowed to reside in the city and given the right of residence. They are not Israeli citizens, but they are citizens of another state which is not identified. They used to write in IDs that the residents of Jerusalem are Arabs, but for nationality. But then they stopped doing that. Now our IDs have three X's instead of specifying that we are of Arab nationality. Other steps and measures I will talk about, but it's important to understand this map for its future implications. This explains what happened in 48 and how much of Jerusalem became under Jordanian control. Now all of this is under Israeli control. Right from the start, Israel, after occupying the eastern part of Jerusalem, relied on 2 points to impose its control over Jerusalem. First, the land, second, the population. The population were always considered as a problem and to the detriment of Israel is an increasing problem. All the ways and means Israel used to expel the population are I'm not here floating demography as a weapon, but 10-15% of the whites in South Africa managed to control the land for a long time. But what is worrying for Israel, the demographic factor is a very worrying aspect for Israeli life, really. Now, in the general context on the land of Palestine, when we talk about Palestine of the British Mandate from the sea to the river, maybe for the first time the number of Palestinians exceed the number of Israelis. Of course, the figures and statistics are under Israeli control. They can manipulate them, but we're almost certain that our number exceeds 50%, and this is very worrisome for the Israelis. We should not consider this factor of demography as something which just happens and will disappear. And Israeli Jewish immigration to Israel is on the retreat, and what is called the exit or departures from Israel exceeded the number who come to immigrate to live and settle in Israel. So, therefore, in a nutshell, the balance of numbers is a negative one so far as Israel is concerned. The Israelis have managed successfully to control the 72 square kilometers. They managed to squeeze the Palestinian presence into about 18 square kilometers. If we make some calculations, now the Palestinian population of Jerusalem after 55 years of Israeli occupation now is they live only on 10 square kilometers. In 67 they were 70,000 or thereabouts. The vast majority of in the whole city and its immediate surrounding areas. Now the number of the population is almost 400,000. The 70,000 have become 400,000 Palestinians. They make up more than 40% of the so-called unified Jerusalem. The latest figures show that they passed 39% in 21. Now, this year, we passed 40% because our annual rate of increase is 1%. And if you remember with us that this permanent capital of the State of Israel, with 40% of its populations are classified as enemies. I do not know any other capital in the world which considers 40% of the population of its capital as enemies and places them under constant monitoring. I think so far as controlling the land and the ground, they made huge successive. They managed to turn large swathes of land into settlements, and they brought around 250,000 settlers. 250,000 settlers were brought to occupy the settlements established in East Jerusalem. So 12% are Arabs and 35% of Israeli settlers. The rest is either natural reserves and their land not available for Palestinians to build. So therefore, the battle for the control of land of Jerusalem is a battle we lost in favor of Israel. Israel managed through settlement, as you can tell from this map, that they managed to really to destroy the urban fabric, the social fabric in Jerusalem, and we see all the settlements surrounding Jerusalem, and some are either inside Palestinian uh, district or surrounding them. So therefore, we have different forms of settlement which is aimed at destroying the fabric of Palestinian life and social life. So therefore, what can this result in eventually? If we take now a compass and we look at this map in a direction of, say, for example, 5, 10 kilometers, and we draw a circle, we will find that despite all the settlement activities, we still find Palestinian people living there. Although the aim was to make the largest possible number of Palestinians leave Jerusalem and to replace them by Israeli settlers, they still failed. So this fact has not changed from the days of the British Mandate until now. And when I applied this method of the British Mandate and the current Jerusalem, despite all the settlement activity, we still have the presence. The growth in population, it's true that today it's important to understand these aspects now. Uh, this is the apartheid wall between Abu Dis and Jerusalem. Abu Dis, practically speaking, is a district of uh, uh, it's only 2 kilometers away from the uh, Dome of the Rock Mosque. This can apply to Al Azariya and many other little villages surrounding Jerusalem. So, therefore, the this wall gives you an idea of the kind of siege under which the city is suffering now. Apart from this wall, there's been a large number of checkpoints that surround the city, so no way can move in or out of the city without passing through at least one checkpoint. Apart from these are permanent checkpoints. Of course, there are other temporaries. And, uh, some of the checkpoints, like Kalandia, have become like international crossing borders, as if they are between two separate states. The settlement under consideration now happens to be on the Kalandia airport. Now you know why the Israelis sort of extended their hand into this area so that they can get their hands on the Kalandia area in its entirety with the airport, and there is a Kufr Aqab district which is within the borders of Jerusalem, yet it has become like a jungle made up of high rises without room to expand. So therefore, if the building was there for Palestinian families, would have solved the problem for many thousands. Jerusalem, as a result of the Israeli policy, has turned Jerusalem in many of its parts into slums in the perfect sense from a sociological point of view. 80% almost of the 400,000 Palestinians who live in Jerusalem live under the poverty line. Th- this is according to official figures from the Israeli institute in charge of determining the poverty line. Although Jerusalem until the 1920s were a city for the middle classes, they were impoverished gradually and annexed them to the Israeli job market. And of course, the opportunities are there only for the low paid. Residents of East Jerusalem are cleaners by and large. They clean everything: roads, schools, construction work, etc. Everything. So, therefore, Jerusalem has many of its young men working for low wages, and this, of course, has led to a deterioration in the standard of living. And the people who can invest had to leave the city because they are not allowed the opportunity because of the high taxes and the lack of land to build on. And of course, people with capital, Palestinian people with capital, went to invest in Ramallah, Beit Lahem, Jericho, and if you go through the Kalandia checkpoint in the morning, you'll find people with capital leaving the city towards Ramallah. But if you go to the Damascus Gate checkpoint, you'll find people in their young early 20s going to work for the Israeli building sites. For this reason, the economy of Jerusalem is reliant on some low degree of tourism, which is threatened by pandemics and other factors. From 1967 until now, the hotels in East Jerusalem have not increased in their size. Not even one extra room was built. Despite the increase in tourism, the number of rooms available in 1967 is one and the same now. In Beit Lahem increased by 4,000%, in Ramallah 2,000%. Jerusalem, which is at the heart of tourism in Palestine, is still limited the same way it was many years ago. So the economy is almost ruined, relies on some sort of low paid jobs. And I don't want to really lower your morale in any way and make you feel disappointed. Uh, when we talk about the old city surrounded by the fencing established by the Ottomans is less than 1 square kilometer. So after 55 years, what's the number of the population? Now in the old city, there are some 40,000 Palestinians living there, 40,000 in total, and 37,000 Palestinians and less than 3,000 settlers. So after 55 years of using all sorts of legal and illegal methods, despite all that, they did not manage to increase the settlers in the old city to more than 3,000. And if you want to compare that to the situation in 1948, it was less than 3,000. So practically have not increased from 1948 until now. So how did the people of Jerusalem manage to protect 37,000 people of their own is a miracle, really, and a sign of unprecedented and unparalleled steadfastness. In the natural situation,
Particularly that most of the spaces over there are public spaces. So we have the Aqsa Mosque that constitute one-sixth, in addition to the markets, the schools, the cathedrals. So these constitute more than 60% of the surface of the old city, and they have all been in the same space, particularly when it comes to the Muslim neighborhoods. So we have the Jews neighborhood and also the Armenian neighborhood or the Armenian quarter. So the population was concentrated in the Muslim quarters, and these quarters are the poorest of all the other areas. So they do not only undergo the closings and the challenges of occupation and the different circumstances as a result of the settlers and so on. No, the situation is dire on the ground. So the picture that you can see before you. So if you stand on the Zaytun Mount to in the direction of Jerusalem, so the old Jerusalem is still an Arab city, irrespective of the Judaization that was carried out, the Judaism process. So Israelis, after they failed to control the old city and also to restrict the population presence and their control of the old city, they went to the circumference of the city, the outskirts of the city. So the areas such as Tillet Silwan and so on. So Jerusalem existed in the Iron Age and also the Bronze Age. This was the city of David, and they were able to use technology, sound, and so on and so forth. So they created a history, so most of which is illusionary. So when you enter there, so they tried to revive so many personalities such as David, Suleiman, and so on. So if you enter the old city, this old city is no different than any other Arab city in the Orient, in the eastern part of the Arab world. So the smell, the goods, the people, the visitors, the activities, this is an Arab city par excellence. And if there are any failures carried out by the occupation, this manifests very clearly in the old city. So people anybody come into this area from Austria, from any place, they would realize that this is an Arab city. This doesn't mean that the old Jerusalem has not paid a very dear price for it to continue. So before the war started, they have used bulldozers in the different areas, including the Maghreb or Moroccan quarter. And within 48 hours, and this was the first time I saw a bulldozer that was trying to destroy this area. And I was living in a closer area, closer to the Maghrebi quarter or the Moroccan quarter. So this was the first position that was undertaken in this yellow line. So this is what is called the Wailing Wall, what is called the Wailing Wall, Ha'it al-Buraq. And also we have the Aqsa Mosque and we have the Moroccan Quarter. And the width is between 3 to 4 meters. This what was given to them by the Ottoman authorities. And after the destruction of the Moroccan Quarter, so this place was changed and transformed into a religious square where soldiers would pretend to be serving their nation, their country. So this is where we see the acts of aggression that take place daily. And when you look at the different regions over there, so there are a number of centers surrounding the old city, including this city, which is opposite the Moroccan Quarter, which is a link between the city of David and Al Buraq, or the what is called the Wailing Wall. So there is in the year 1969 they took a decision to confiscate the whole region. So there was a Jewish quarter that existed during the Mamluki time, and also we have this historical region. So 87 of the properties were Arab properties that were rented to Jews. In 1969, they decided to confiscate and expropriate the whole region, and they called it the Jewish neighborhood. And you would find that in many, many maps, including some friendly maps. So in the 70s, the end of the 70s of the 20th century, they decided to settle in the different areas and neighborhoods of the city. I would like to reassure you that in the last 55 years, they were able, outside the confiscated and expropriate region, they were able to control 90 properties. So 50 of which are properties that belonged to Jews before 48. So we've had 40 properties that were confiscated, some legally, some illegally, some through brokers, agents. So millions, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent in order to control this particular area. When we talk about 40 properties out of 3,600 properties. So they were able to forge the documents of 40 properties. And the remaining 50 properties, they say that these are Jewish properties that belong to the Jews before 1948. So the law says that the Jews have the right to recover their properties, and the Palestinians do not have such a right. You've heard about Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Let's suppose that the territory, the lands where those properties have been built belonged to the Jews. Let's suppose this because there's so many question marks about the property. Let's say that this belonged to the Jews. So Jordan, with the UNRWA, decided to build a neighborhood for refugees where 50 families were able to live. So they were not 50 families at the time, they were about 25. These refugees, some of them owned properties in the western part of the city. And the justification was that those lands belonged to the Jews. That is why they wanted to expel them from those properties. They said, we are subjected to the same law, which is the Israeli law. But the Israeli law legislates and gives the right to Jews to recover their properties, but it does not give the Palestinians such a right. It deprives them. This is not an apartheid state. This is not a racist state. This is the only democratic oasis in the region. This is a very, very, very tolerant kind of occupation. So it is us, just we are trying to recover. We have not been able to forget Palestine after 70 years. The problem lies with us, not with them. So Jerusalem, so undergoes so many excavations. I do not know of a region that had been excavated as it is the case with Jerusalem. Each centimeter is excavated. So Ayat is looking at me. I think time is limited. So we have had excavations in all directions. So we have so many lines that we know here in the plan. These are the lines of the tunnels that exist. So I do not know of a state that has the right to excavate underneath your own house, your own property, without you even knowing it. This is all an effort that is exerted in order to develop a certain narrative. So this is the making of a certain nationalism or nationality. So underneath the yellow line or yellow area, there are houses that belong to Palestinians. They want to have a number of parks, and they said that David used to own them. So the occupying forces, the occupying country, that tries as much as it can to develop such a narrative. So this is the Aqsa Mosque. So the Aqsa Mosque is one of the last fortresses that exist, and the occupation. They have never hidden their intentions vis-à-vis Al-Aqsa Mosque. So they have 30 associations in order to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque. So we cannot say that this is or these are acts that are committed by extremist groups. No, this is an effort that is carried out by the third temple. So these are the efforts that are exerted at the level of the Aqsa Mosque. And the Aqsa Mosque remains now in the hands of the Israelis after the intention to come up with the third temple in Jerusalem, Al-Quds. So even if the buildings are destroyed, even if the buildings need to be rehabilitated without the approval of the Israeli forces, the Palestinians cannot do so, unfortunately, in the city of Jerusalem. So this is the situation that we have here. So we have so many employees of the endowment Al-Awqaf in Palestine, in this region, who do that. They try to collect and get to know about the different regions that exist now. But there are battles that exist every day in order to control Al-Aqsa. So this is a declaration that I have taken a picture of. It is next to Ha'it al-Buraq, which is called the Wailing Wall, where they say that nobody is allowed to enter this region. So we're talking about a number of religious movements that are very extremist, very, very racist indeed. And they have prepared as much as they can. So this is the so this is the holder for candles, which is made of gold, and they have prepared the clothes of the priests that are going to be in that particular structure. So this is not something that would have a number of extremists only. So this is a war of narratives that we see here. So it is a war of narratives by the Israelis. It is a very populist kind of endeavor to develop such kind of narratives. So this is an area that had been developed during the Mamluki time, which is close to the Aqsa Mosque. So this is a lecture that was delivered about this particular region where representatives of the military establishment were all present. So we have the president of the or the of the municipality of Jerusalem was also present there. So our neighborhoods in Jerusalem, due to the fact that we have lost our territories, these have been transformed into slums where many, many people live in very dire circumstances. So this is the old city, the Jewish neighborhood, which is similar to fortress structures. This is a synagogue that was restructured, rebuilt. These are persons carrying maps of the third temple. So they're carrying the maps of the third temple. So the occupation was also surprised as a result of the reactions they had seen. So the reaction started, as you all remember, was in 2017 when they tried in the Lions Gate to have the metal detecting machinery, and they were able to do that and have such equipment introduced in those areas. I went, so people were praying on the ground. People, even those who never, people who never even prayed, Christians who never prayed, all of them moved to pray on the ground. Tens of thousands. I walked approximately 4 kilometers in between people to reach the closest area to the mosque. People were took to the street. So this is a kind of a dynamism that is not organized. Nobody has invited for such dynamism, for such nobody invited people to go and take to the street. And this is what we see now, what we try to understand here. All the Palestinian organizations and groups, with all due respect, irrespective of their names, did not play a role. And if they play a role, it is a marginal role. There is a kind of a self awareness, a kind of an identity based kind of awareness that pushes people. And this has made the occupation unable to target such efforts, because this is a body with no head that is moving in a dynamic way. So they are very, very creative in the way they take initiatives. Those people, most of which are young people, many of them we thought had lost their national identity. Many of them dropped out of school. Many of them started working with the Israelis, and they did not have a very strong identity, and they joined the Israelis to work. But irrespective, and despite all that, they were able to take to the street. You remember in Ramadan when there were checkpoints established by the Israelis in order to stop Palestinians from Israel to come to pray in the Aqsa Mosque. So they closed the Jerusalem Tel Aviv road. they did not allow them to go. People left their cars, their keys, and they went to pray. The occupation was asking them to remove their cars, and they were able to arrive and go to Jerusalem to pray. So, of course, there's so many things to be said. So, the latest manifestation that shows the level of challenge and that has made the occupation unable to deal with the situation. They were in an awkward situation. So it was the funeral of Shirin Abu Aqla, where people were unified. So this was a manifestation of all the aspects that are known amongst Palestinians, simplicity. So it was a Christian lady that was assassinated in a premeditated way. So we have seen after Jerusalem had gone all through all these things. But what has happened in Jerusalem is the most important thing. What has happened in the French hospital. So this is a territory that belongs to Great France, had been stormed by the police, the Israeli police. And this had made the Palestinians stronger. So they wanted to carry her from Sheikh Jarrah into the old city, but they were not allowed to do so. They worried that this would remain or be transformed into a march. So we had tens of thousands of persons following. I think Faisal al-Husseini was the largest funeral, but this is the second largest. But this is not Faisal al-Husseini. This is a journalist. Hadn't there been impediments put by the occupation, the number of persons that would have taken to the street would have been much, much greater than what we had. So every year, the Israelis celebrate their victory starting from Damascus Gate. So this year, the occupation stayed and planned for this march. They planned for it for 6 months. They got forces in order to protect this march, more the number of forces even beyond those that had occupied the West Bank. So there was a cordon around Jerusalem where persons wouldn't be able to reach the old city. So it was cordoned away from the old city by 2 kilometers. People were not able to go to the roof top of their homes. So there were a number of surveillance airplanes. One whole country worked and planned for 6 months in order for those people to be able to prove its sovereignty on Jerusalem. But they know that their sovereignty is no longer as it used to be. So where is this all leading us? So the question that I posed at the beginning of my intervention, now I think the answer to it is very, very clear. This is not a lost cause. Jerusalem has not come to an end, no. There is a new generation in Jerusalem, at least our children. This generation has not seen the occupying forces. They do not know fear. And if they are arrested, they start chanting. And the occupation, they do not have any answers to be given. Yes, they respond to those who use rifles or use weapons. Yes, they they arrest them, but they cannot do anything when Palestinians go to Bab al Ammud, the Damascus Gate, and they go and they start reading books, or when you see somebody that goes to Jaffa challenging the people over there, you know, we cannot move from one point to another in Jerusalem without being monitored. There is an there is a train that goes close to Bab al Ammud, the Damascus Gate, and then it goes towards West Jerusalem. During Eid, people went for prayer, and the people of Shafat, they got into the train and they started saying Allahu Akbar, and the train was moving on as if, so the picture as if the train was heading to the pilgrimage. So we constitute 40% in the old city. Yes, we have lost a large part of Jerusalem outside the cordoned area, and the occupation forces are facing difficulties. So our youth are able to develop the project that would protect Jerusalem. So they have their own mechanisms and their own tools. Neither the Palestinian Authority is influential, nor the other organizations are influential, but the youthful dynamism, the youth who know the kind of conflict that exists and the tools that can be used. So they are leading the march with a huge body. So, but can this lead to future leaderships? I do not know. But what I can promise you is that Jerusalem is going to be a source of concern for the occupation. So in Beirut, when I was in Beirut after the dynamism that took place in the Lions Gate, I told them that this is not going to be the last incident. I told them that Jerusalem is going to continue revolting, and after one revolution to one revolution, there are going to be other smaller revolutions that are going to explode in their face each and every time. Jerusalem is going to embarrass the Israelis if we do not have a clear plan. We have to say that the Israelis do not have a clear plan. They cannot impose anything in Jerusalem. We have lost a lot, particularly when the territories and lands were expropriated, when we did not know the mechanisms and tools that had been used by the occupying forces. So at the time when we were only honoring armed strife, so the possibility for us to achieve things on the ground, this possibility exists, and this is something that can be achieved by everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor, for this very important lecture on the reality of the situation in Jerusalem. Difficult, yes, but still with hope, and in view of the steadfastness of the Palestinian people in the entire territory of Palestine and Jerusalem in particular. We have half an hour for your questions and answers. We open the floor now. Thank you, Doctor. Very happy with your lecture. From your observation, the Israeli laws pertaining to third generation, the property of the absentees, etc., You said that they only managed to lay their hands on 40 properties in the old city. Uh, are there any statistics on the impact of the Israeli laws on life in Jerusalem? Thank you, Doctor. Very nice lecture. It's been a while. We haven't heard information like this. Very inspiring. You closed by something important in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in Palestine in general, and Jerusalem in particular, about the question of organizing identity. We had a momentum in the past, but we did not manage to keep it. The flag march, we did not see much activity surrounding it. So far as the Palestinian factions are concerned, can they pollute Jerusalem? And how can we, as young people of Palestine, do something? For example, in in Gaza and I went to Jerusalem on my way, and I there we passed through the so-called Jewish headquarters in Jerusalem, and because I wear the hijab, there were settlers there, but they still ran away when I approached them. Okay, how can how can the high birth rate of Palestinians consolidate the Palestinian presence and consolidate the Arab identity of Jerusalem? I'm not sure I understood all the questions. I'll pretend I have. The Israeli laws were decreed, at least so far as Jerusalem is concerned, to control everything. I will not delve into details on these laws, but laws have two aspects: one to do with people and population, one to do with land. So far as the one pertaining to people, they are aimed to limit the growth in the Palestinian population in Jerusalem. For example, there is the law called the center of residence where I live. Although my family have been living in Jerusalem for generations, if they think I live somewhere else, they will withdraw my residency card, which is like the green card. Say I move to Bir Zayt, instead of being really humiliated every day through checkpoints. Once they know I live in Bir Zayt, they will withdraw my permit to reside in Jerusalem. All the people who live abroad or live outside Jerusalem face this problem. The second type of laws I'm talking about laws pertaining to the land. Confiscating land can take any form. Once they say it's for public utility or public good. For example, in 1969, there was a law called every country does that, confiscates land to build roads or schools. But there was a family who used to live in the old city in 1967, the Balkan family. They could not manage to vacate them, and that family was well advanced in understanding their rights, and they asked Israeli lawyers to defend until the case reached the High Court of Justice in Israel. In the end, the court has passed the following sentence that for the sake of coexistence and cohabitation in Jerusalem, then no non-Jewish family should be allowed to live in Jerusalem. Can you imagine? For the sake of cohabitation, nobody but Jews should live there. Although the Burqan family had documents, deeds, proving that this property was theirs since for 4 centuries. I told you in the entire 72 square kilometers there were 70,000 people. If the war was to happen in July, maybe the population of Jerusalem would have been 200 and 250 because a large number of them used to work in Jordan and in the Gulf, and in July they returned for their vacations. But because the war happened in June, then the late Faisal Husseini, his father owned a house in the Sheikh Jarrah district. Because in 1967 he could not prove that he was not in Jerusalem because he was away, the house was confiscated. The house of Abdul Qadir al Husseini, a very well known Jerusalemite. So anybody who did not prove that he was not inside Jerusalem, his land was subject to confiscation. Even if he owned part of property, they would confiscate it. It's customary that most properties are owned by more than one person. So Israel wants to apply this law. If they can do that, they can manage to get their hands on half of our properties. As for the third generation law, that has nothing to do with property. That pertains entirely to the population. Before 1948, there were some 90 properties belonging to Jewish people scattered in Muslim districts, and some people have rented have have rented these properties either from the Jewish people or from the guardians of the Jordanian properties. In order to confiscate these properties, the, the, they, they passed the third generation law, which says until third generation only legal protection can be provided. And in most properties now, the third generation is the current generation, so this means that this is a preparation for the future. They want to confiscate the remaining properties. Any any problem they have, they pass a law to solve it. So the entire judiciary system in Israel is there to serve the occupation. I don't know what one can do for Jerusalem. The institutes in Jerusalem are in dire situation. The ones who used to get support from the European Union, some refused to sign the declaration by the European Union against terrorism, which included names of well known Palestinian nationalist figures, so they could not do that. So all these cultural, health, and other organizations are suffering now, especially that what they used to get from the Palestinian Authority is not The Palestinian Authority now owes hundreds of millions of dollars to hospitals in Jerusalem. So instead of getting help from the PA owes them money. So I don't know. Maybe finding ways of maybe it's not necessary to support like an entire state should help another state. Maybe a school here in Qatar can announce itself as a twin school of a school in Jerusalem or something, and that way they can help. Yes, it's true that the flag march did not have much reaction, but remember they had 6 months of planning. They had more than 8,000 soldiers or something, or policemen. They surrounded the old city. They allowed nobody to. They sneaked in and out like thieves, like bats at night. Really, it was not a victory march. Even in Israeli media, there was complaint that what happened to our sovereignty if we cannot raise our flags freely? And even with that, the Palestinians managed to fly a drone which waved the Palestinian flag. The last question I did not understand. Yes, about the demography. I focused on this side, although I did not use it as a weapon. But so far as the occupation is concerned, this is a central issue. This is a source of concern. Now, there are some areas where there is an overwhelming Palestinian majority, like Galilee and Negev, and these are very important because Israelis are being squeezed in a coastal area, and the rest of the areas have a Palestinian majority. If the situation continued as it is without any drama elsewhere in the world, then the reservoir of Jewish people in the world, they are not coming to Israel. Even in the United States and others, there are now factors which are limiting the Jewish migration into Palestine. So therefore, this demographic factor is a source for concern. For Jerusalem specifically, it's very important because in Jerusalem people want to live and survive. I remember when they were building this wall, there was a number of people, Jerusalem people who used to live in the neighboring areas. They managed to find their way into the areas within the walls to protect their identity. Now the Israelis know that even if they live under very unhealthy circumstances, people still live. There is a place called Khan al-Sultan with 60 rooms, 2 by 3 in size, similar to hotels in the Middle Ages. Each room houses a family. So the bare minimum of appropriate living conditions not available. Despite that, they accept that and they are not prepared to. Some own their houses with gardens, but they accept to live in this dire situation to protect their identity. I said there are things I cannot explain. There are many phenomena that you cannot. What is this kind of chemistry which ties people to the city? I don't know. There is something there. I don't know how to explain it, but Of course, the demographic growth is very costly for us. Accommodation is another story if we want to talk about it. Now, to have some residents in like an apartment in a building, 1 square meter is like $600,000. In Ramallah, a 180 square meter apartment is 200,000. The cost of land is high, the taxes are high, the cost of building is high. The You pay something like $80,000 just to get the planning permission to build an apartment. Where can people get that? It has to be cash. You want to buy a property, you have to have $600,000 in cash. Maybe if you get someone, a contractor who's more lenient, will accept 400,000 and the rest will be in installments on a period of 2 years or something. So people are finding solutions which are turning some districts into slums. In Jerusalem, according to Israeli statistics, more than 20,000 units have been built without planning permission. Can you imagine if each unit houses 5 people on average? This means there is 100,000 people living in houses which are not they not have planning permission. This means they live under a constant threat of Israeli bulldozers coming any minute and leveling these houses to the ground. Nine, so 100,000 people live in constant worry, despite that their last observation. Okay. I have a friend who was the director of an important establishment. He is from a wealthy family. He decided to help his son get married, and the son gets something like $2,500 a month, which is a respectable salary. He wanted to rent him an apartment. He couldn't find any property for rent for less than $1,500. So if he spends that amount on rent, so my friend decided to divide his own to divide his own property into two and give half of it to his son to live. I don't know for how long we can survive. The latest solution we found, which is problematic to say the least, I'll just share it with you. Some people started renting or buying in Jewish settlements. Next to my house, there is a settlement called Navi Yaakov, only yards away from my house. If I'm not mistaken, the number of Palestinians living there, either through buying or renting, is almost 1,000 people. This reminds me of Carmiel and Nasra and other similar places. This means this means the people of Palestine are becoming part of the Palestine of 1948. Of course, I didn't mention their role in our struggle. They're there in large numbers, they're organized, they take part with us, they help our economy. In the Aqsa Mosque, in every battle they're there. D- Despite the fact that a large number of them live permanently in Jerusalem, although they are not registered as as Jerusalem residents through things to do with elections and the electoral register, and that if we include them, I think our population would increase by at least 10,000 people, in my estimation. Now they are part of the social life of the city. I'll take a second round of questions. There is a question on the role of Arab role and the Jordanian role on Palestine, on Jerusalem. Another question: you said there is 30 Israeli organizations trying to build the temple. What is stopping them? And there is another question about the culture of the city of Jerusalem. Can you please shed some light on that? We have 10 minutes. The role of Jordan, first of all, I have to be fair in this. Al Aqsa Mosque is under the Jordanian administration since 1967, the Jordanian religious endowments, and they managed well to administer the buildings, the structure, the physical building. Structurally, they are in a better condition than the last 5 centuries. They renovated all the buildings, and we thank Jordan for that. Also, there was a Palestinian agreement for Syrian Jordan.
So Jordan would manage the holy places in the in these circumstances, because if Jordan withdraws from the management of these holy places, so there's going to be a vacuum, and Israel would not allow neither the Palestinians nor any other kind of entity to manage these holy places. So the preservation of Jordan is part of the preservation of our rights. So in recent time, the Hashemite trusteeship has been expanded to include a number of cathedrals and churches, and some churches see in the trusteeship of Jordan a protection to them. But when it comes to the political perspective, I think that there was no consensus between the Palestinian Authority and the Jordanian authorities, as it is the case now. It has never been as it is the case now. So when it comes to the plans to destroy the temple, so there are a number of factors. So you remember during the Crusades, so they have not destroyed the Qubbat al-Sakhra and the Aqsa Mosque. They had transformed them into churches. And one of the reasons, and God knows where better, so this was an attempt to provoke the Islamic world for it not to carry out a kind of a large-scale jihad. So such analysis exists, but there are perhaps some other reasons, but perhaps this is not the right place to talk about them. Israel realized, since the policy that existed in the past, where they said that we're going to allow you to preserve the a limited number of your holy places, but officially, at least, they did not want to provoke the Islamic and Arab world because they did not want to have a large-scale recruitment of Muslims and to make the conflict a religious conflict. So the Israeli people is no longer a secular kind of community as it used to be. So during the Ayyan Riyan, they move that was or that existed at the time. It was a secular, socialist kind of trend that existed at the same at the time. But now the situation has changed. Now the community in itself is very, very extremist. That is why the plans to destroy the Aqsa Mosque are much harsher and bigger than they used to be in the past. So the Israeli community makeup and the makeup of the demography of Israel is going to produce perhaps even more extremist governments, even governments that are going to be more extremist than Bennett's government as well. That is why the mosque is in huge risk. And we have seen how they try to storm the Aqsa Mosque in an organized way. If we observe and see those who try to storm the Aqsa Mosque, we have to say that half of them are paid to do so. We do see the faces repeatedly appear in the Aqsa Mosque, and the Israeli government insists on the continuation of such kind of activities, particularly that these squares of Al-Aqsa are considered public parks. The Awqaf, the endowment, does not own the squares, the open squares that constitute in excess of 80% of the Aqsa Mosque. These are public parks and not a mosque. So that is why the risks have increased. And in my view, we're going to see much deeper challenges when it comes to the Aqsa Mosque. And I said that this is one of the last fortresses that we are witnessing today. So when it comes to material and immaterial kind of heritage or moral heritage in Jerusalem is not different. So of course there are particularities when it comes to each and every village or town in Palestine. So I didn't understand what you meant by the question when you talked about this heritage. So we have intangible heritage also that exists in Jerusalem, in Al-Quds also. So we didn't hear the question, unfortunately. So there are a number of cultural centers that exist in the city. We have the largest of which is Zimus Center that has a number of activities that organizes theatrical performances, artistic activities that are organized. And also we have the Palestinian theater that organizes so many theatrical pieces, and also we have so many cultural events that are organized by the Palestinians, particularly in the old city where we see so many youth meet in the squares of the Aqsa Mosque. So this is what we see in those squares, in those areas. We would like to thank you very much, Doctor, for this very, very rich presentation. Thank you for sharing the lives, the day-to-day lives of people who live in Jerusalem. We would like to thank you very much for your presentation, and we welcome you once again. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.